So it's been about a month now since I did a podcast with Morris Waxler and Paula Coffer on the issues surrounding LASIK and their book, The Unsightly Truth. Uh, Previous to that, we did a podcast with Cynthia, and since that, Cynthia's been on the stage with everybody that I can't name because there are too many of them. And Morris has also been in the highlights, as has Paula. So just a brief introduction to who you all are again. Morris?
Well, brief introduction. Well, I am retired. I trained in neuroscience and vision science. Worked at FDA for some decades. Was Played many roles, but initially in the laboratory, and then unfortunately was involved in the trying to get control over the LASIK industry, which started with RK, with radiokeratotomy. So it ended up not being so great, actually, but I did my bit at various points to try to get things under control. But
Yeah.
I had some naivete with regard to what would happen when I left, but and it didn't work out well. But I must say, thanks to Paula, she dragged me out of my retirement, and then I learned a lot from her.
That's a nice segue into Paula. So, Paula, tell us something about you.
I had LASIK 25 years ago, almost to the day, about 25 years and a month ago. um, and it was a disaster from day one, and it's only gotten worse over the years. You know, LASIK surgeons like to say, "Oh, it's give it some time, it'll get better," and they always push that out. First, it's give it a month, then it's give it 3 months, then 6 months, then a year. But
Yeah.
once I realized that my situation was not going to improve, and that was very early on, very early on. I learned quickly. I just decided I had to do something about this dirty business of converting eyes to commodities, and this LASIK industry-wide cover-up and the lies they tell to lure unsuspecting patients into risking their only pair of eyes. And so that's what I've done for the past 25 years is just read everything I can get my hands on, all of the science, all of the clinical trials, all of the LASIK trade publications, and I just feel like I have to know as much or more than they know so I
Yeah.
can expose their lies. And
Yeah.
so I've started a support group on Facebook and have a website and a blog and helped with the Morris and Dr. McKay write the book. And yeah, so it's just been a journey, a 25-year journey.
Yeah. So nicely on to Dr. Mackay. Is it Mackay or McKay?
It is McCoy.
McKay,
Mackay.
I've said it wrong
Yeah,
all this
like
time.
like I.
And it's MAC. So it's the Scottish Mackay.
Tis a Scot. Yes, the
Wow.
Mackays were the most primitive of all the Scots. Lived way up north, near the Firth of Forth.
Right.
Which makes them tough.
And something about you, Cynthia. I think we all know, but let's hear it.
All right. Well, I went to Harvard University, went to medical school, SUNY Downstate, did my eye residency at Columbia Presbyterian Harkness Eye Institute, and I practiced ophthalmology in New York City for 40 years. And in that time, I took a lot of sick eyes and made them healthy.
Yeah.
But LASIK takes healthy eyes and makes them sick. And
Yeah.
I was one of the very first people in the world to hear about LASIK because it was invented by a colleague of mine at the Harkness Eye Institute.
Yeah.
His name was Stephen Troquel. He wasn't a cornea specialist, he was an orbit specialist. And one
Right.
day I was working in the Eye Institute down in the clinic, and he came rushing into my room and he jammed a piece of paper in my hand. It showed a cornea, it was an electron micrograph of a cornea with a perfect rectangle cut out of it. And he said, this was done with an excimer laser. This will revolutionize ophthalmology, and we won't need to wear glasses anymore.
Mm.
And I thought that was the silliest idea I've ever heard in my life,
Yeah.
because the cornea has more nerve endings than any other part of the body. It's packed with nerve. And if you're going to reshape it using a laser, you're going to cut through all these nerves. Wow, I said, that'll cause horrible pain. Second, I thought to myself, it will make the cornea thin. The cornea is very thin already, but it'll make it very thin, very vulnerable. Um, and it will cause scarring as it heals. And I said, this is going to be a disaster. And I told that to Steve.
So
I
what
thought
what
this,
year was that, Cynthia? Just
it was
just to
in the
get some
late,
perspective.
it was in the 1980s. I
And
don't,
this was prior to LASIK, right? So LASIK
well, this
hadn't.
was the invention of LASIK. He even
Sure. Okay.
told me the name he thought up,
Yeah.
laser assisted in situ keratomyolysis. He told
Okay.
me the
Okay.
name. He was so excited. And, Andy, a first year eye resident in their first week would know this is the stupidest idea in the world. You can't do that to the cornea. I mean, imagine how much it hurts if you just get a little speck of dust in your eye, a tiny little speck of dust. It's agony.
Yeah.
Or if you get a scratch in your cornea. And
So
this
this is
was,
over 30 years ago, right? Oh, so what? 35, 37, in fact.
yes, yes. And
37.
it was a dumb idea from the beginning.
Yeah.
And it's a dumb idea today, and it'll be a dumb idea forever.
And it's the other D it is a dangerous idea, right? So, Morris, thinking of these dumbs, dangerous, drastic um, conclusions that smart people were coming to, but as Cynthia has alluded to, you could have been a first year grad school student to know that this is not very smart, right? Let's take a piece of grit, for example. If somebody came to the FDA and said, "Hey, we've got an idea. We're going to throw a bunch of grit into people's eyes, and we think, over time it's going to make their sight better." What would a scientist such as you have said to somebody at that point?
In some ways, it's overstated. Do you remember Golub and the Precious and the Ring?
Yes,
The
in
Tolkien.
Tolkien's
Ah,
War of the Rings.
yeah.
So here's what really the history. Early in the I'm actually early. It starts early in the 1900s. There's this sort of hubris amongst a small group of surgeons of wanting to conquer the eye, wanting to be able to reshape it so that you wouldn't have to wear glasses. You wouldn't have. You, they knew enough to say, we can do this. A tremendous amount of hubris, and then you had people like Fyodorov and others like who just were excited about how they could do it and totally ignoring the beauty of what was of the eye, the beautiful complexity of the eye. Knowing that, so they just used razors. I mean, literally used razors to make radial slits in the eye, and it was a disaster. So I knew some of those early people, unfortunately, but I didn't realize the full implications of what was going on. I mean, I was studying the cornea from the standpoint of ultraviolet radiation effects and so forth, but I wasn't really paying attention to these other folks who were doing things that that was not my part of my responsibilities, and I
Sure.
wasn't paying attention to that. So
So you,
yes,
yeah.
it's totally ridiculous, but they were
Mm,
already doing it
mm,
in the early '80s, in the late '70s. So
yeah.
when I came on the scene, I was busy helping the FDA figure out what to do with all these newfangled lasers that were being used for all kinds of purposes.
Got you.
Uh,
Got you. Yeah.
so it was so once radiokeratotomy collapsed of its own weight by causing so much trouble, people like Waring showed how George Waring III, he
Mm,
showed how RK was so terrible, but he helped make the transition because these people were all skilled. They wanted to use their skills to go for the precious, to go for the ring, to
yeah. Yeah.
make it really really so they had
Yeah.
this found this new laser that could make these fine little cuts, but
Yeah.
it's not a piece of glass you're cutting or a piece of inanimate object. It's a
Yeah.
beautiful structured layered organ.
And
So
can I ask, Paula, because um, you made a conscious decision at some point in your life that your vision was deteriorating enough that you wanted to have I guess a surgical outcome that was going to improve that vision. And how much material was available to you to weigh up the pros and cons and the risks?
You're asking me, right? I have a
Yeah.
lawnmower right outside my window at this
Mm.
moment. I've had my microphone muted so you guys wouldn't have to put up with that. But so you're asking me, if you could say that one
Yeah,
more
so
time?
I'm interested with and so I've heard Cynthia talk about the early pre before LASIK was even commissioned, and not surprisingly, Cynthia thought it was a ridiculous idea. You've heard Morris's, or hopefully you've heard Morris's experience of it, and then here you are. You come to a decision that you want to improve your eyesight, and I'm just wondering how much information was available to you and evidence was available to you, or were you one of the first patients and there just wasn't enough information?
It was first approved. Well, one was approved in 1998, but then the following year, 1999, two lasers were approved, Vizix and Summit, and that's when it really exploded. And I
Mm,
had LASIK the following year in 2000. But will tell you at that time there was very very little information out there. If you tried to research it, you didn't find much of anything. I mean,
yeah,
and of course, since then I've learned where to look. Back then, I did not know where to look. I didn't.
yeah,
I mean, I never read scientific literature. I never
mm,
spent time digging into medical journals. That wasn't my thing. I was a banker. Yeah.
yeah.
So,
And we didn't have Google, right? We did not have Google, so there was everything was primitive. Search engines
yeah,
were
so there
primitive.
just wasn't much out there. And,
Mm,
I knew people that had it and recommended it. And I just got
yeah,
caught up in the hype and just thought it was, I mean, the way they make it sound like, it's as easy as getting a manicure,
yeah,
they make it sound like it's risk free. And, they make it sound like when they cut a LASIK flap that it's just this little thin, piece of tissue that just grows right back or reattaches. And they don't explain what's really
sure,
happening. What's
yeah,
really happening. If people understood what really happens during LASIK, nobody in their right mind would want this surgery.
no,
Now I understand. When a flap is cut, they're cutting off, a third, a fourth. Probably in my case, it was more like a third of the thickness of my cornea, leaving
yeah,
it weak and in, unstable. And so to answer your question, there just wasn't much out there, and
Yeah.
I probably could have done more research if I had had any idea of the risk that I was
Yeah.
taking, or the true nature of what that surgery does, and the consequences of it, the lifetime consequences of it. But
Yeah.
I just didn't know, and I just thought it was,
Yeah.
flap zap, back to work the next day. No more contacts, no more glasses. I could work out without glasses or contacts. I could do my, I was active scuba diving and just worked out every day and busy
Yeah.
banker. And I don't know. I just got caught up in the hype.
And
So let me
Cynthia,
make
would you
a little correction
go?
in terms of the timeline. What you may not realize is that George Waring and Fred Kramer and others were doing flap LASIK as early as probably 1992.
Right.
Uh,
Okay.
and I'm sorry, yes, 19. They were doing. I mean, they were doing it. They were doing uh, PRK
Yeah.
as early as the late 80s, 89, 1990. And then by the time 1995 arrived, when FDA approved the PRK, the flap, the non-flap LASIK, where they scrape off the cornea, the epithelium, they were already had many clinics that were doing flap LASIK. And thousands of patients were being done by Fred Boyer.
Yeah.
So, but this wasn't public knowledge. They weren't publishing that. They were doing it illegally. They were doing
Right.
it before that. So by the time it was approved in 1998, it was already being marketed heavily. So it's
Yeah.
not surprising that Paula didn't know this. She couldn't have done, even if she had looked in the literature, it would have told
Yeah.
her nothing.
Yeah, yeah, and that's what I was. That makes sense, Morrison. Thanks for that because I think that's critical to. I'm putting my self in the place of Paula when I asked Cynthia this. That you know, you've obviously, Cynthia, dealt with patients post LASIK and trying to help people not experience LASIK at all. But do you think it's fair that um, even today, so let's forget the 1990s and early 2000 when Paula was considering this, that patients have a certain amount of trust in their medical professionals, and they have a certain amount of trust in the ethics of those people and of their government. Is it fair to say that, if the FDA is saying that it's safe, and if a large percentage of the medical syndicate are saying it's safe, that Paula, no wonder, decided to go down this path because of the ill education?
Well, Paula has brought up a key point, which is that these surgeons were experimenting on human beings without the knowledge. And we all take a Hippocratic oath,
Yeah,
which is that we will do no wrong. And they didn't know what they were doing to the eye, and the information about what they were doing to the eye has been leaking out over the years. For example, if you do a scan of the corneal nerves of the eye after LASIK, there's chronic inflammation that
right.
never goes away. And the second universal law of all surgeons, including eye surgeons, is you have to give adequate consent, which means you have to not only discuss what the risks are in language the patient can understand, but you have to give the percentages. It's a very different thing to say in a consent form. It's possible you might experience a little bit of a dry eye transiently, but if you have written in the consent form, there is a 75% chance your eye will feel as if there's sandpaper pasted under the lids, and if it will burn as if there's acid being dropped into it. And this condition is permanent and untreatable. That's the truth, and they're not telling the truth.
So, Paula, on that, I mean, that's pretty graphic, and um, there's there's no way you couldn't know that that's going on. How soon after you had surgery did you start to experience these sort of side effects?
Well, as far as visually, my vision problems were immediate.
Right.
It was day one. But the sensations, the dryness, the pain, that took some time. And back then, of course, I didn't understand that. I thought I just was, didn't experience any dry eye after the surgery.
Yeah.
Boy, was I wrong. Actually, 5 months after the surgery, I had gone to Atlanta to see a specialist thinking I was going to find somebody that could help me. They did a tear test 5 months after LASIK, and my tear production was zero in both eyes at 5 months later. And I had corneal staining, I had all the signs of dryness, but I didn't feel any of that for several weeks to a few months after LASIK. And now I understand why. Because when you have LASIK, when they cut the flap, they're cutting through all those subbasal corneal nerves, and then what's left beneath that, they vaporize with the excimer laser. So your corneal nerves are severed and destroyed during LASIK. And I mean, high-powered microscopes even show this. If you look at a LASIK cornea 1 week after the surgery, there are no corneal nerves. They're gone. They're not there. They're gone. And of course, they slowly, and in irregular patterns begin to regrow over time. But
Right.
and it was during this initial period that I thought I didn't have dry eye. I didn't feel anything. I could put eye drops in my eyes. I thought this was weird when I would put eye drops in my eyes and the drop would hit my cornea. I didn't feel anything. I felt nothing. It was numb. And I
Did
thought,
you go back to your surgeon and say anything to the person that did this surgery to you?
I went back numerous times, and every time I went back, I was told, well, I was complaining about two things: the dryness and the visual symptoms. My night vision from day one was a train wreck.
Right.
I'm talking about massive starbursts, halos, multiple images. It was it was like being on an LSD trip at night. Not that I've ever been on an LSD trip. But it was shocking. It was shocking. And I knew people that had had LASIK, and they said, yeah, I saw some halos at first, and it got better. And I'm thinking to myself, well, am I just making too much of this? Is it going to get better, like the doctor is saying, and like a couple other patients are telling me? And
What did the doctor say? That's
okay,
I'm interested.
so the
Yeah.
place where I went was one of these places that you don't get to see the surgeon except for
Right.
the day of surgeries. And I didn't even know enough back then to realize that itself is a red flag. I didn't.
Right.
I thought the person that did my exam to declare me a good candidate, I thought she was a medical doctor. I thought she was an ophthalmologist. I didn't even know the difference really between an ophthalmologist and an optometrist back then. That's
Got
how
it.
naive I was. But so I couldn't really get in to see the doctor afterwards. I only saw this same optometrist. And
Yeah.
she, like I said, at first she tells me to give it 3 months, and then she says give it 6 months. And when I
Wow.
finally did get in it was like trying to get in to see the Great Wizard of Oz. When I finally did get an appointment with the actual doctor, the surgeon, and they tried to stop me every step of the way
Of
up
course.
until the
Yeah.
moment I got in that room. He told me to give it a year. So
Wow.
he said some patients take up to a year to get better.
Morris, I'm really intrigued by this. So the FDA, no doubt, when they approve these things, they must set in some sort of standards, some regulations that say, after you've had surgery, if the patient, has side effects or has anything else happened, that these things must be dealt with within a certain time. Are these timelines, do these sound normal and acceptable within the work that you were doing at the time?
Well, let me explain a little bit about the process. At that time, and perhaps still, the FDA has a whole series of rules for medical devices. FDA was confronted with a fait accompli in the late 80s. I'm sorry, the late 80s for sure, but the late 70s even, for a lot of different reasons. And we don't need to go into them, but the point is that myself and others at the agency were trying to get surgeons who were doing what they thought that the FDA had no right to control. We were trying to get them under the control of the federal requirements. They didn't want to be controlled, and so the FDA had panels of surgeons and others that would advise the agency about what to approve and what requirements should be placed on the surgeons in terms of telling the patients.
Right.
So as early as 1980, so those of us who were vision scientists there, and we met at ARVO, which stands for the Association for Research in Vision and Ophthalmology, which I went to regularly. I met with people from NEI and others, ophthalmologists and optometrists who are well known. We discussed these issues. Early on, we discussed RK, we discussed LASIK. I mean, not LASIK, we discussed PRK at that time. And we said, they're going to have contrast sensitivity losses. We talked with the people who were the premier people in contrast sensitivity. We went back to the agency, we said, everybody's going to have loss of contrast sensitivity. And what the panel said after meeting for a couple of years later, the panel of advisors essentially said after 12-hour meetings, oh, that's okay. They're going to get a loss of contrast. They basically blew us off because essentially the surgeon, the ophthalmologist, the corneal surgeon said, we're not going to use contrast sensitivity as a measure of loss. We're only going to use 20/20 visual acuity. Well, you can have 20/20 visual acuity and have a lot of blurriness.
Right.
So we lost that battle. So by the time 1995 came around, the surgeons who were doing PRK had already shifted to LASIK, unbeknownst to most of us at the agency. Even though I was talking to most of the surgeons, they were keeping that information from me. I found out eventually, but by that time they were already connecting up optometrists. They were already co-opting the optometry community as a feeder way to get people who needed glasses and contact lenses. So the agency was always behind the ball. And I had the assumption that once all that information came out by the late 1990s, that the agency would put more requirements in the patient information brochure. It did not happen. It did not happen. So yes, the agency could still and could have then made those requirements they could have put restrictions on it. They didn't do it because they've been co-opted by the LASIK surgeons. There's a lot of money involved. So in a variety of ways, they co-opted the staff that worked for me and the staff that worked for people that followed me. That's the truth of it.
Well, that's that's a hard tale, right? And Cynthia, you worked amongst these people, right? Some of these people that were butchering patients were your colleagues, and maybe some were your friends, right?
Well, I had great respect for Steve Trokel. He had made genuine contributions in the field of orbital surgery, and I admire that. And he's smart,
Yeah.
but he doesn't know what he was doing. And
Hmm.
it's it's like OxyContin causing uh, addiction, or it's like concussions causing brain damage. It's obvious. It's like the emperor has no clothes. For
Hmm.
example, the cornea has a perfect smooth shape. It's like a dome. And if you're going to change the focus of the eye, so the focus is on the retina, and you don't need glasses to keep the eye in focus, you have to take away tissue in the center. Now you don't have a dome, you've got a mesa shape. And the pupil is small, then you're seeing through the center part, which has the new curve. But if the pupil dilates, you're seeing through the peripheral part, which is the old curve of the eye. So 100% of the time, 100% of the time, when the pupil dilates in dim light, you're going to see double, triple, quadruple. You're going to have halos, starbursts. And, this is a public health hazard.
Yeah,
We are driving down roads, and
yeah,
people who've had LASIK are coming towards us in the dark, and they're seeing not two headlights, but 20. And
yeah.
we're flying in airplanes with pilots who
Right.
have had LASIK.
Yeah.
And they're seeing, instead of a nice row of landing lights, they're seeing many rows of landing lights.
Mm-hmm.
And people who have LASIK should have driver's licenses that restrict them from driving at night. There are many examples of, take the horrible story of Pat Tillerson, this wonderful, he was a National League football player. He was shot by his own men because it was nighttime, and one of the men who shot him had LASIK. He couldn't see in dim light. It's
Dear
not
God.
just a cosmetic procedure that lets you go without glasses. It
Yeah,
alters you permanently from
yeah,
natural vision in dim light and
yeah.
bright light, of course, but particularly dim light.
So, Paula, it, it almost makes you speechless, right? It, this happened to you 25 years ago, and at that time, you probably still had some faith and belief in the system that was supposed to care for you, okay, and the government that was supposed to regulate those that care for you. How how long did it take for you to realize that there were many others that had been injured in the same way?
Okay, so my faith in the system was very short lived. I'm a fast learner. But initially, I did think that I was, I thought that I would just find a way. I thought I would find a cure. I thought I would
Yeah.
find a surgeon or a technology or
Mm.
something. And the longer I looked, the more damage, the more I learned about how inherently harmful LASIK is. So instead of finding the solution, I realized just what a predicament I was in. And so I don't think I answered your question. What was the actual question?
Yeah, so I was wondering how long it took you after you had surgery, and I can imagine the confusion at the time and the pain at the time. But when did you first realize that others had been
Oh yeah,
deliberately
others.
damaged? Yeah,
So within a few weeks, I think, a couple of
that quick,
months,
that quick.
I found an online refractive surgery patient support group online. It was called Surgical Eyes. It's been defunct now for many years, but it was active back then, and there were about probably 1,300 members, and I became active on that bulletin board, and eventually hooked up with a lot of these patients. And we had support group meetings. We had one big one in Atlanta where everyone flew from all around the country and had a support group meeting. And so I learned pretty quickly that there were other people out there with these same problems. It wasn't long, a couple of months probably.
And so in your first year to where we are now, what would you say the growth of uh, membership is the wrong word, but the growth of victims that are in your group, how has that grown?
Oh my.
What sort of numbers?
So I think I started the Facebook group in 2014. I hope you guys can hear me, that lawnmower out
We
there.
can, we can.
It's bad. I think I started the group in 2014, so it's been about 11 years. And I really didn't expect much. I didn't expect it to grow very much. My initial intention was just to, wow, that is so loud. My initial intention was just to reconnect with a lot of the people that I had met from the old Surgical Eyes support group, because we were losing touch with each other.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so I thought, well, since we now have Facebook, if I start a Facebook group, I can reconnect with all these people. But it right away, the group
yeah.
just grew and grew and grew. And yeah, so it's around 8,000 people now.
Wow. So and that yeah. So that's some growth. Morris, I've seen lots of media articles lately, which is a great thing, getting lots and lots of coverage, and you're being called a whistleblower in some of the articles I'm reading. How do you feel about that term?
That's fine.
And do you think you did blow do you think you did blow the whistle, or did you?
Well,
Well,
I honestly don't give a crap what they call me. The thing is, I, you know, agency folks have known the truth of this for a long time.
hmm,
And they know what I know. And went back initially to talk with my former friends and colleagues in a straightforward way with um, Dr. Mackay. And they basically blew me off. They still know my phone number. They know
hmm,
they know everything. You know, they know things are really terrible. There's some things that they um, so I don't. It's not a question of blowing the whistle. The whistles. I mean, Paula blew the whistle a long time ago, even though she wasn't in the agency. Haven't been in the agency since 2000, when I
hmm,
retired. Um,
yeah,
so it's this information that they have available. They should be blowing the whistle um,
yeah,
on themselves. I mean, but the problem is that they need to protect all of them. Every time they've made a decision not to do something, they've dug themselves a deeper hole.
yeah,
They
yeah,
they have made themselves complicit
yeah,
with the
yeah,
problem because they didn't take the proper steps initially, and they have continued to to um, to team up with LASIK surgeons because they're
yeah,
getting rewards for that in one way or another. I can't know what those rewards are,
yeah,
professional accolades, whatever, um, um, whatever it is. So yes, I'm fine with calling me whatever. But you notice the one thing they won't call me. They won't call me to have a on-air conversation about it. That's what they
no,
won't call me.
no, no.
Yeah.
And what would you say if you heard that the FDA has finally come to their senses, as far as they possibly can right now, and are agreeing to send out health notifications to those people considering LASIK? Would you believe that they're
I'm sorry.
doing
Say
that?
again.
How would you feel if you heard that the FDA had agreed to send out notices to people considering LASIK to warn them of the harms? Do you think that's ever going to happen? And would you believe that it was going to happen imminently?
Well, maybe it will happen. I was a little surprised to see that Ryan's parents received a letter from FDA saying that basically saying that the LASIK clinics are not reporting. That's an
Yeah,
interesting. I haven't seen the actual letter, but it'd be interesting to see the actual letter because it suggests that there's some crack
yeah,
in their wall, in their self protection. Their
yeah,
main leader has left that particular group, that the ophthalmology group there. So maybe something has happened. We need to keep up the pressure. They're not going to
yeah,
go
Absolutely.
lightly because they've built themselves such a a, um, a big hole of trust. They're not to be trusted. So are they going to really put the pressure on
mm,
these big
mm,
clinics, on the big?
yeah,
They've been spending 25 years, more than 25 years, 30 years coddling this
yeah,
industry. Are they going to
yeah,
really um, speak up again? Because they've transitioning to other kinds of ways of doing it, ICLs and implants of various sorts. They've got a they've got a reputation to protect. So I wait and see. They
yeah,
can still call me. They can still call Cynthia. They can call Paula. They can say, "Oh well, tell us more. How can we actually help patients?"
yeah. And talking of actually helping patients, that's Cynthia. That I was going to come to you then. I mean, a letter's one thing, right? But actually, what is the real call to action here?
The real course of action is to tell the truth.
Hmm.
We have got to tell the public the truth about
Yeah,
LASIK. It's not something that's being hidden. Our book, The Unsightly Truth of Laser Vision Correction, has in the back of it 11 pages worth of articles from the scientific literature. There are
yeah,
158 papers in that. Um, and every remark, every statistic that Paula or Morris or I are are quoting, we're not making it up out of our heads.
no,
It's there in the literature, and I have to say, the American literature is much more scanty than the European
hmm.
literature. And I speak now as a surgeon because surgeons say anybody can do surgery. What you have to be able to do is handle the complications. And these LASIK surgeons don't want to hear that the patient has a complication. They pretend
Yeah,
these patients are crazy. They send them to psychiatrists. They make jokes about these patients being suicidal. And you have to realize another thing about the money.
yeah, yeah,
Paula and Morris and I make zero from all of this. Zero. We're
yeah,
spending money, and this book that we've written, The Unsightly Truth of Laser Vision Correction, is being made available to anybody who needs it in the Audible vision for 99 cents.
yeah,
And in the book, we give patients information about their problems.
yeah,
We tell information about doctors who specialize in treating LASIK complications
yeah,
and that will be able to give them help because you can manage this to a certain extent. You can put in eye drops made from your own blood, which helps
yeah,
the pain. You can put on scleral lenses, which, if you can tolerate them, helps your vision. There is some help about there, but the LASIK surgeons are not helping the patients after they've injured them.
yeah, yeah,
That's not a surgeon.
So, Paula, tell me something. I came into contact with you, Morris, Cynthia, Ed, um, about 18 months ago, maybe 20 months ago, and at that time, I wasn't hearing a lot about LASIK. I wasn't picking up the newspaper, looking, in Apple News and hearing anything. What do you think's changed? I can say that barely does a day go by in the last few months that I'm not hearing of another media outbreak or media story or YouTube video. No matter what it is, there is communication after communication after communication. What is happening?
They could only keep a lid on this for so long. I mean, we've reached critical mass. We're talking, I mean, I know of 40 known suicides, and I have a list. I keep a list. Unfortunately, I have to keep a list of suicides. Another 10 that I can't confirm, that I have pretty good information on, but don't feel comfortable to say, okay, this one's confirmed. So 50, if you count the ones that aren't confirmed. And how long can they cover that up? I mean, they've managed. I mean, it was so much easier back when I had LASIK to cover it up. I mean, so much easier. And the longer this has gone on, and the more people that have been damaged, and now we're getting to the point that the patients that had LASIK back when I did are now presenting for early cataract surgery. So that's getting out. Like, why do I need cataract surgery at only age 65 when my mom didn't need cataract surgery till she was 85? So that's leaking out that LASIK is triggering, is causing these early cataracts. And these patients are losing their vision. They're back in glasses. They're not the happy patients they used to be. And it's just, this is catching up with them.
Yeah.
This is beginning to catch up with them. And I don't know how much longer they can keep this covered up. But, if I could convince the media, every time I have an opportunity to talk to the media, I try my best to get them to report the real statistics. They always want to focus in on my personal story and report that.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
my story's been out there. We don't need to report that again. What we need is for reporters to to stand up and be brave and report the truth. And if these LASIK surgeons, they always interview a LASIK surgeon for every article. And when these LASIK surgeons lie and say the complication rate is much less than 1% and 99.9% of patients are extremely happy, that has never happened. Never happened. There's never been a study where 99% of patients were extremely happy. You know what they do? It's another one of their ways of deceiving the public. They do these surveys. Are you unhappy? Are you satisfied or unsatisfied or somewhat satisfied or very satisfied? If they are anything other than not satisfied on a scale of 1 to 5, they call them extremely happy. They have so many ways of deceiving the public. They deceive the public with the numbers of procedures. They call them procedures. So I'm 2 procedures because I have 2 eyes. So when you see these numbers, 800,000 procedures, the media reports it as 800,000 patients. No, it's not. It's 400,000 patients. There's just all these things, and it's just, they must have teams of marketing people to just control this narrative and come up with these sound bites. And it's just, it's really frustrating. I'm sure you can see the frustration in me when I talk about this, because I feel so passionately about shutting this dirty industry down.
Yeah. And talking about shutting,
one of the best things that I think that could happen is for ophthalmologists who are not LASIK surgeons to speak up. I mean, I have wonderful eye surgeons, wonderful ophthalmologists to treat me. I have tried to talk with them. I have tried to be invited to give a talk at their clinic. They don't want me there. So unless they're willing to speak up and be honest about it with their patients and with me, I mean, one of my surgeons who did a wonderful job of putting in 2 stents in my eye, she does LASIK. That's offensive to me. She's a
Wow.
wonderful surgeon. Um, but until ophthalmologists speak up as a voice and not protect themselves, they're doing themselves a disfavor.
Well, they're
They're,
Yeah.
all
they're,
they're all members of the American Academy of Ophthalmology, and most of them are members of the American Society of Cataract and Refractive Surgery, and they are towing the line. They are not they are not going to get out of line and upset their colleagues. They are going to, if their colleagues, if the AAO is endorsing this surgery, they're going to keep their mouth shut. And that's what's happening.
Apart
These
from
big
Cynthia.
organizations support this surgery.
Yeah, but Cynthia, you did speak out, right? And you continue to speak out.
Well,
Yeah,
it's so glaringly obvious. And
yeah.
there's so many ophthalmologists who agree with me. There's a very fine surgeon. I had him take out a cataract in my right eye. I've been in the operating room with him. I know his eyes are great. His hands are great. He does great work on eyes. And he did LASIK. He doesn't do it now. And I said, "Why don't you do it now?" And he says, "If anything goes wrong, there's nothing you can do about it." But is he speaking up? No. Another friend of mine is a world renowned corneal surgeon. He was one of the first people in the world to do LASIK. He doesn't do it anymore because he's seen the results in his own patients. He's allowed himself to see it's a lousy procedure. He won't do it. I spoke to two of the most prominent ophthalmologists whose specialty is to help LASIK damaged patients. One is in Miami, one is in Boston. They're at very fine institutions. They spend their days helping LASIK damaged patients. They know how terrible this procedure is. It's loony that they don't actually uh, say anything. But I asked them. One woman, I gave her an early copy of my book, and she said, "Oh, it's a great book. It follows the literature, very accurate." And I said, "Won't you please say something? Would you just say the consent form isn't adequate? It's got to be more specific." She wouldn't even do this. And, you know, it's so simple to show this. Consumer Reports did a little study with a couple of hundred people who'd had LASIK, and after 7 years, they found that 55% of these people wish they'd never had it. That's a real
Yeah,
simple study. You don't need to be a PhD like
yeah,
Morris
yeah,
to find this out. It's written on the sky that
yeah.
LASIK is a terrible procedure.
Well, let me tell you something. So, if in 2 months' time we have the progress that we had since our last podcast, we were just starting to hear that we might have some interest. In this last couple of months, it has grown. But something else, the community, even the small community where I live, I talk to people and I hear people talk now about LASIK. My friends and family, if anybody is considering it, we warn them against it. I have absolutely no doubt that even if we are not sat in front of TV media and written media, which actually these days we are becoming more so, we are talking, and we are talking to our communities, they are talking to their communities. The word is spreading. So the one thing we can't do is just stop talking, okay? And it's that is the most powerful thing that we can do to stop this. Because if the government isn't going to stop it, and if the medical professionals, as they call themselves, aren't going to stop it, then talking is the only thing that we can do to stop it. And I thank you again. The time runs so fast, but it's always fascinating to, and Paula, when I say fascinating, I feel desperately sorry for saying that because your story shouldn't be fascinating, right? This is
The
it.
word fascination doesn't bother me
Yeah,
because I'm fascinated with reading case reports of other
yeah,
bad outcomes. I want to learn everything. So I get
yeah.
that. I do get that.
I just think I think for me and certainly the people that I talk to, I think we're just astounded. It would be a bit like saying to somebody who can't fit into their shoes, well, I know what we'll do. We'll cut your toes off. It's just you just wouldn't do that, would you? And it just seems ludicrous, but it's happening. And look, thank you for sharing your experience, Morris. I always give you the hardest time of everybody when we do these
That's okay.
these chats. And I know you're the enemy of the state now, by the way. So it's. You get it from both angles, but thanks again all, and we'll bring this to an end now. But I'll talk to you once I've pressed stop.
Great.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so